I'll make the weekly reminder. Whatever. Good afternoon and welcome to Purdue University and the Security Seminar. Our speaker this afternoon is Gene Kim. He's the founder of the Tripwire software intrusion detection system, which he developed here as an undergrad working with Professor Spafford. And many of you might recognize that as a company that sells software in that arena. Since 1997, I think Tripwire was formed as a company. So Gene Kim is the Chief Technology Officer there and co-founder, along with many other exploits in that area, including author of several books in the area of audit. So Gene.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm here to talk about prioritizing processes and controls for effective and measurable security. This is actually an area of tremendous passion for me, which really stems from some work that I've started in 1999, which is studying a group of high-performing IT operations and security organizations that we used to call Gene's list of people with good kung fu. Right? These are people who talked differently, acted differently, and had profoundly different operational results than your typical IT organization. So, why do we say that? Because they had phenomenal service levels as measured by mean time to repair and mean time between failures. They had great security as measured by early and consistent integration of security into the IT operations lifecycle. They had a great posture of compliance as measured by fewest number of repeat audit findings and the lowest amount of staff dedicated to compliance activities. But oddly enough, they also had the highest efficiencies as measured by high service to sysadmin ratios and amazing amounts of unplanned work, less than 5%. So, there were 11 of these organizations that we had identified. They included Ken Silva, the VP Operations at VeriSign, Mike Prospect, the VP Operations at New York Stock Exchange, Jennifer Baig, the CISO at Bear Stearns, Ken Larson, the VP of Operations at Schlumberger SEMA, Kevin Baer, the CTO of IP Services. There were 11 of these organizations that all were doing the same thing. Each that they had developed Darwinistically, each to prevent the last disaster from happening again. So they say behind every FAA regulation is an airline crash. Right? So too did each one of these organizations derive the same methodology of running day-to-day operations and security, each to prevent the last disaster from happening again. So in 1990, about 2000, I started working with the CTOs of one of these organizations, and our goal was to capture and codify what each one of these high performers did, and that's what we called the Visible Ops methodology. Our goal was to really kind of capture and really understand, what did they eat, what did they breathe, and so we published this in 2004. And we co-founded the IT Process Institute around it. It's a nonprofit organization, or rather, to really do three things: do quantitative benchmarking, research, and development of prescriptive guidance like Visible Ops. So amazingly enough, in the last, since we published it, we've sold 45,000 copies. And so, what did we do next? And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Is really ask the question: hey, is this stuff that we put into Visible Ops true? Right? And we actually expanded the problem statement a little bit to say, when you take a look at process frameworks like Itil, or control frameworks like COBIT and 7799, or the NIST security documents, right? If you've seen the way these documents are generated, you'll know that, hey, there's not a lot of testing that goes on, right? People make stuff up, or they get inherited by tradition, or it's just a good idea, right? So compare that to what happens in the drug world, right? In pharmaceuticals, right? There's very large, structured, empirical drug trials that must happen before you can go to market, right? And so our goal was to really see if we can replicate that same methodology and solve what I think are some big problems, or come up with answers to some big problems. Okay, how do I? Arrows on the keyboard. Okay, there we go. So this is called the IT Controls Performance Study that we've led at the IT Process Institute, and we had a large cast of supporting characters, including PhD researchers from Florida State University, University of Oregon, Carnegie Mellon University, and Syracuse University. So what I'm going to do today is really talk about the problem statement and maybe just kind of give you some core beliefs that we had going into this. Then really go into the quantitative research. I'll go through the methodology and the key findings, and then conclusions, and then also a call to action. So the first part of good science, right, is you have to phrase the problem correctly. And so the problem that we saw was, that IT management and IT security management have difficult jobs, right? Because they have, when you're in IT, you have two main requirements: deliver new projects to the business, or the organization that is supporting you, and then operate and maintain what you have, right? And do that effectively, efficiently, with compliance, securely, so on and so forth. The second thing is you have descriptive frameworks out there like Itil or COBIT. How many people here have heard of Itil or COBIT? Okay, some of you. So Itil is kind of the IT operational framework that kind of describes the major processes that happen inside of IT. Love Itil. COBIT is the same thing, but from an audit and control perspective. Many security people use it, but how many people have heard of COBIT or 17799? Okay, so that's the kind of orthogonal set, right? So you have processes and controls are orthogonal. So the problem with both of these is that they're descriptive, right? They're like a dictionary. They're defining things. Organizations don't do dictionaries, right? They do projects, right? So another way to put it is, if you want to write the great American novel, you don't have to use every word in the dictionary. So which words do you use, right? And I think we wanted to sort of establish what those are. So what they also have in common is that these guidance or these descriptive frameworks are based on anecdote or belief, right? How do we test them? So when what we've observed is that when IT management, that includes security management, can't bring quantitative science and empirical science to bear on these problems, that's when you see transformations fail, projects fail, right? People not hitting their goals, and that's what leads to failed initiatives and projects. But more important from a people perspective is that the people fail in what they're set out to do, and you can only do that so many times before you kind of get eased out of the organization. Am I making sense here? So far, so good. So this is what kind of the problem statement, and I love this quote here that came from Dr. Longstaff at Carnegie Mellon University at the Software Engineering Institute. He said, he's on our advisory board, and he said, IT people are valuable and therefore worthy of study, right? So we want to see if we can come up with better answers to these things. Let me show you the graph that kind of started it all out for us. This is almost 3-4 years ago, which is this graph. When we plotted it this way, it kind of helped make more concrete a deep suspicion that we had, which is that one of the byproducts of effectiveness is efficiency. Or maybe from a security perspective, one of the byproducts of effective and efficiency is security. Why do we believe that? What this graph shows on the x-axis, well, let's go on the y-axis first, is this number of servers under management. Right? How many servers are you managing? Right? And I know there's more that IT manages than servers. Databases, applications, networking devices, all that stuff. But back then we called it servers. But on the x-axis is what is the server sysadmin ratio? In other words, what is the span of control of each sysadmin on the line? Right? And what we found was that those organizations that we called high performers also had stunningly high server sysadmin ratios. You see how that your typical IT organization has a server sysadmin ratio of around 25 to 1, but the high performers are 4 to 5 times higher at 125 to 1 or above. Does that kind of make sense? So what we found was that one of the those organizations that were the most effective were also efficient, right? So just to kind of benchmark this, some mental benchmarks is that when you take a look at highly specialized infrastructure like the rendering farm for Lord of the Rings or Google or Akamai, you're looking at server sysadmin ratios of 12,000, 15,000 to 1. So the big realization here was, wow, why is it that high performers are also efficient in addition to effective? So far, so good. Okay. So as I mentioned, what we did, at that point in time was really capture and codify what those organizations were doing, and that's what led to the visible ops methodology. And I'll share a little bit of this with you at the end of the presentation. But I think it's really meant to kind of codify why did the transformations work in the high performers, and why did the hundreds or even thousands of transformations we've seen not work. Right? In other words, what is common to the successful ones, and what they do that the failed transformations didn't do. Right? So that was kind of the methodology of the thinking. So let me just briefly paint for you what the downward spiral looks like from a security perspective and show why it has a lot to do with IT operations. And then I'm going to go into the key findings of the research and then the methodology. One of the things that you typically see in security in real life is that you have these kind of, either you have policies and procedures that have been documented, or maybe there aren't any, right? But even if they are documented, they're not really, they match